Hello, I'm Neil Goodwin, and welcome to this critical review of my practice. The images presented and critiqued here are all for my proposed final project on documenting the lives of people who live alone. I am currently working with 5 participants, and my intention at the end of this module is to present images of one of them, Marion, seen here. She is 77 years old and a former science teacher. She is alone because her husband Dave is in a care home with a rare form of dementia, which emerged soon after they retired. They met in their first year at university and have been married for 53 years. Living alone is among the most significant social changes of the modern world. In the UK, the number of people living alone is almost 8 million, more than 1/3 of all households. The reasons are largely down to demography and changes in personal relationships, for example, divorce. Feelings of loneliness and isolation are common among people living alone, and it has been reported that there are some 2.5 million chronically lonely people in the UK, a situation exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Furthermore, there are reasons to believe that living alone, and particularly ageing alone, affects physical and mental health. Loneliness is associated with a 50% increase in mortality from any cause, making it comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day and more dangerous than obesity. Furthermore, the adverse impact of loneliness on mental health results in loss of hope, energy and contribution in many daily lives that are spent in quiet desperation. I believe that this context will help add credence to the veracity of my work. Turning the project into a practical reality has necessitated me spending time with each participant, getting to know them and talking about their lives even before picking up the camera. It's more than Susan Sontag suggests about photographers becoming a tourist in other people's reality. It's about developing a trusting and mutually respectful relationship so that the photography can start and progress. As photographer Jim Mortram says, the most important part of making pictures is listening. I never see anyone who I take photographs of just once. I always go back, check in on them, see how they're doing. As with all participants, I am not only photographing Marion, but also documenting her life story. Photographically, I consider Marion to be the most successful of my practice to date because of the trusting relationship she and I have developed. There are a few examples of other work documenting people's lives that have inspired me. I'll cite 3. The first is Kaylin Devaney's The Day-to-Day Life of Albert Hastings, a photo essay of 83 images. You can see how Devaney's work touches on themes of domesticity, ageing and solitude, all issues linked with people living alone, which are also reflected in the work of Richard Choi. The third example is the British photographer Celine Marchbank, whose practice explores everyday life and is driven by the quiet details of domesticity. For example, Marchbank's book Tulip captures the last year of her mother's life. However, it isn't the subject that inspires me, but rather the photography driven by the context of the subject. Summed up by Sean O'Hagan's review of Tulip. He talks about the photography in the context of the hinterland that surrounds someone who is seriously ill. That heightened but hazy place is evoked throughout in quiet imagery, light falling on a medication chart, raindrops on a window pane, her mother's sewing box. I think this image of Marion with a photograph of her husband Dave reflects the intimacy that O'Hagan alludes to. Alex Soth says that the best photographs always inspire curiosity rather than satisfy it. As he goes on to say, I think this ambiguity is one of the most thrilling aspects of the medium. A photograph is only a minute fragment of an experience, but quite a precise, detailed and telling fragment. And although it might only provide little clues, the photographer is telling us that they are very important clues. I see lots of ambiguity and clues in this image. What is Marion looking at? What is she thinking? What is the significance of the empty chair? Are we curious about the rest of her apartment? I like to think that the technical aspects of the image are good. The colour, the tones and the composition, specifically the location of Marion in the wider context of her apartment, the deliberate use of natural light. Furthermore, I hope the image makes us curious about what is outside the frame. Contrast that with what I consider to be a much less successful image of another project participant, Eddie. Although there are clues about Eddie's life in this image, the pots on the table and the etched picture of the author Ian Banks, for example, the image is not aesthetically impactful. It does not draw us in and conveys little or nothing about Eddie himself, generating only little curiosity about his life. As my tutor said about the image, it does little other than record a scene. It does not generate an emotional response. It was Ansel Adams who said a photograph is usually looked at but seldom looked into. My aim here is quite simple, to get people to look into my images and see the challenges for people living alone. For example, that loneliness and potential isolation are the same irrespective of demography and socio-economic circumstances. To achieve that, I need people to spend time looking at my images, and by having their curiosity raised, delve more into the summary life stories that will also be included in the proposed photo essay. Michelle Bogue reminds us that a great documentary photograph engages us emotionally, if only for a moment. It shows us what we must see, even if we would prefer to look away. Here is the first of two powerful examples of what Bogue means. This is from Nancy Borowick's work, The Family Imprint, a daughter's portrait of love and loss. Writing in the Wall Street Journal, William Mayers describes her work as moving, humorous, or simply reportorial. Howie and Laurel embrace in one picture, both their heads bald from chemotherapy. There is nothing mawkish here. It is adults looking after themselves, each other, and those they love. The second example is taken from the work of American photographer Dave Heath, who spent his whole career exploring themes of loneliness and alienation in modern society. Photography curator Keith Davis says about Heath's work, his photographs reveal that the faces of strangers are never truly alien to us. In them, we recognise basic elements of ourselves, evidence of our spiritual and emotional kinship. Apart from capturing the moment and aesthetics, creating the connection between the photograph and the viewer is also, as John Sarkowski says, not what a picture is of, but what it is about. As I've said, I want my images to stimulate people to think more about living alone and the links with loneliness and isolation. But I would argue that a photograph alone will only take us so far. It was Dorothea Lange who said, all photographs, not only those that are so-called documentary, and every photograph really is documentary and belongs in some place, has a place in history, can be fortified by words. Lange never viewed her photography as exclusively an aesthetic endeavour and favoured describing contexts within which her works could be viewed, providing details and life histories of her subjects. But there are risks with using text alongside photographs, as Flusser and Berger summarise here. Let me use this image of Marion as a practical example. You wouldn't know unless I told you that this is Marion playing bridge. She is a huge fan and a regular player, but because of the pandemic, bridge cannot be played face-to-face and has to be played online. It is currently a somewhat isolated pastime. There is little or no opportunity for social chat, but despite that, Marion would say that bridge is currently her lifeline. My view is that both the image and text sitting alongside it would underscore her sometimes lonely life. I believe that linking text and images will create a social documentary that will add to the knowledge and literature on living alone, but how successful that is will depend on how it is presented. My current thinking, apart from seeking opportunities to exhibit the work, is to present it in the form of a photo essay. And here are two examples. The first is John Sakowski's 2004 book on the French photographer Eugène Atget. I find the juxtapositioning of text and images on pages facing each other attractive. A more contemporary example is Hoxton's publication Single Dads, to be published later this month. So to finish my presentation, here is a mock-up of a similar approach using another image of Marion. Thank you very much for listening.